Druids should not enter forests. This dude. And my single favorite gag of the whole book. Some might call it stupid, but I call it the ultimate visual dad joke, and I apologize for nothing. Welcome back to Page by Two Tatis, an overly thorough examination of Asterix, panel by panel, page by page, pun by pun. I'm your host, Augie Obelix Jr. Today we're looking at page 5 from Asterix Volume 7, Asterix and the Big Fight. Asterix and Obelix beat up some Romans, and the Romans plotted against the Gauls with a plan to take out the Druid Getafix first. Now, on to page 5. This is a classic transition. The previous scene ended with Felonius Caucus saying he's going to dispose of the Druid. Naturally, we turn the page and cut to the Druid. Solid storytelling, transitioning the reader, leading the reader, really, from one scene to the next with a nice piece of dialogue, a nice bit of continuity, a segue between scenes, if you will. This is the kind of transition where Alan Moore would have included a clever bit of overlapping dialogue to help it out, where the last line of Caucus's word balloon at least would have been in a caption box at the top of the first panel on the next page, with bonus points for some clever bit of wordplay, maybe some ironic commentary on the following scene. We don't need that here, but it's the kind of thing he likes to do. It's the next day now, and Asterix is leading the reader into this side of the plot, asking Getafix where he's going. And it's a classic story setup. The Druid is heading into the forest beyond the village to gather some ingredients for his magic potion. He usually doesn't say which ones, and we don't really have a verifiable recipe, but that's okay because you couldn't make it in the real world if you tried. But we'll get to that later in the book as well. This is a recipe, if you will, for trouble, and it's a well-trodden one already. In Asterix the Gaul, Getafix heads into the forest to gather some magic potion ingredients, and is captured by the Romans. In Asterix and the Golden Sickle, Getafix breaks his golden sickle and needs a new one. Here, thankfully, they convince him to stay back in the village while Asterix and Obelix go on an adventure to replace the sickle with no harm done to the Druid. We dodged a bullet there. In Asterix the Goth, the third book now in the series, Getafix is headed to the Druids convention, which Asterix insists on escorting him to just before the Romans manage to kidnap him anyway. Actually, it's not the Romans here, it's the Goths. Every forest is inhabited by some enemy of the Gauls. In Asterix the Gladiator, the fourth book now, Cacophonix strays outside the walls of the village into the forest where, naturally, the Romans capture him. Well, mostly they were just trying to shut him up, but the point stands either way. The forest is a very dangerous place. It's filled with Romans. Here in this book, Getafix is going into the forest for some ingredients and thinks nothing of it already. Asterix, at least, is self-aware enough to have read the first 4 books in the series and insists on following him. Come back for page 7 to see how right Asterix is on this whole thing. This page even includes thought balloons. Thought balloons were common enough in North American comics in the 1960s, as well as French comics, of course. They're pretty much out of fashion today, but Asterix was never a big thought balloon comic to begin with. Even thoughts that maybe characters should have kept to themselves often wind up coming out of their mouths. A character might be walking alone in the forest, which is a very bad idea, as we've covered previously today, and they're still likely to say their thoughts out loud. It's just a comic book convention. And these word balloons on this page are pure plot exposition. It reminds me of those that David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane's Amazing Spider-Man issues had, where Spider-Man would go swinging through the city to give McFarlane something really cool to draw, while Michelinie could have Spider-Man thinking up the entire plot, talking about characters and motivations and what was going to happen and what his plan was going to be. All that was covered in a bunch of thought balloons over a really cool big image or double-page spread. In this book, Asterix is going to follow the Druid for his own good. It's a smart idea, but as you may have guessed from the cover, it's going to backfire in a new and kind of spectacular way. Which brings us to the next panel. Obelix is walking by, carrying a menhir as he's wont to do, and he volunteers to join Asterix and deliver his menhir later. Yet he's still carrying his menhir into the forest. I hope I'm pronouncing menhir right. I'll get it right eventually. Him bringing the menhir into the forest with him is something we like to call Chekhov's gun. No, not that one. Definitely not that one. Yeah, this guy. Anton Chekhov, not Pavel Chekhov. If the writer puts a gun on the mantle in Act 1, someone needs to fire it by the end of Act 3. Every element of a story must be necessary. If you include it, you should use it. That Chekhov's gun. Again, you saw the cover already. You know what's coming. Goscinny needed a way to get Obelix to carry a menhir into the forest for the plot job he's about to do. It's called out in the dialogue explicitly, with a small joke to make it seem like it's no big deal. But of course it's a big deal, as the entire plot of the book depends on it. Goscinny makes light of the whole thing, and we just move on. There's a term for this in screenwriting/novel writing. It's called hanging a lantern. If you've done something that's so obviously out of character or illogical because you needed to get it done for some larger reason, shine a light on it, hang a lantern on it, acknowledge it to the reader/viewer, or for my British friends, reader/viewer. They're more likely to buy into it if you tell them, yes, I know this makes less sense than the rest of it, but go with me on this, it's for a good reason, it'll pay off, just trust me. Your audience will cut you slack when you do that. Also, I just realized that my Google search on the topic brought up this blog entry, in fact, 2 blog entries from Melinda Snodgrass on the topic. She was a writer and story editor on Star Trek The Next Generation. How did I manage to pack 2 Star Trek references into an Asterix video? This whole video is turning into Screenwriting 101. If at any point I even think about saying save the cat, please leave a concerned comment below. Let's look at one more language thing before we move on, though. For this sequence, the dialogue in the American and British translations are basically identical, and they are both very close translations from the original French. You can see minor differences here on the left, the British use of pinch versus the American steal, these Romans versus those Romans again. Nothing major, nothing that'll impact your enjoyment or understanding of the story. The real work of the translator really is in naming the characters and devising puns that work better with the local language. Most British puns and cultural references happen to work for Americans, and those that don't, well, we'll talk about one of those in the next video. Also of note in the first panel here, it's the second time in the book that Obelix declares the Romans to be crazy. I don't think that happens that often. Look how little Asterix is here. The proportions are a bit different from what Asterix would ultimately peak at. His head is a bit too big, or his body is just a bit too small, or maybe his head is too tall, I'm not exactly sure. If you watch the evolution of Uderzo's art style through his entire career, you can see Asterix gently morph over the years. Never a big change from book to book, but a larger change when seen over the course of a few years. Looking back at book 7 today, knowing how things change even in the next few books, let alone the end of Uderzo's career 40 years later, it's much easier to see. Here's a graphic the Asterix folks put together to show a little bit about how Asterix evolved as a character. Asterix in the big fight would be pretty much in the middle there between 1962 and 1966 in this chart. I'd like to see a chart that took actual Uderzo drawings from the books of the time, rather than this sort of modern redrawing of what the proportions look like, because it's still a bit too clean for me. But yeah, that 1966 model is about perfect. By 1977, he had grown too tall, he had straight legs instead of perpetually bent legs, sort of the way Peo drew the Smurfs with bent legs. Asterix started to look like a lanky teenager in the end there. For that matter, Obelix is a little smaller than he'd eventually be too. He'd get bigger and rounder with a bit more of a teardrop shape for his body there before Uderzo was done with him. When do you think the designs peaked? Leave a comment below and let me know. I'd say it's somewhere in the mid-teens of the series. There's definitely a point where you can see it degrading later in Uderzo's career, but I think it holds a high level for a fairly long time, especially considering how many pages Uderzo was spitting out of Asterix throughout the 1960s and mostly into the 70s. Or, as I once memed, this is the difference in the first 10 years of the series. Obelix's mustache gets braided, Asterix gets shorter, but the proportions work better. Obelix gets rounder. Not fat, I would never say that. If the first half of this page is all about setting Asterix, Obelix, and Getafix into the forest, the second half of the page is all about setting up the other side, getting the Romans into the forest so that we might have a good clash. Flonius Caucus is happy to let Nimbus know that the Camouflage detachment is ready to embark on their campaign to grab the Druid. And this leads to the funniest moment in the book for me, the ultimate dad joke. Who dares say the art of camouflage is dying out in the Roman army? It's made all the funnier by just how proud Nimbus is of his soldiers, how loudly he proclaims their jobs so well done. Then you look at Felonius shrinking behind him, stuck now with the duty of telling the centurion that he's wrong. That's not camouflage, that's the hedge. The truth is quite the opposite. In the first panel, he looks almost sheepish, like he's afraid of the reaction he's going to get when Nimbus realizes he looks bad. By the second and even the third panels, though, Felonius is more annoyed by the whole thing. Look at those eyes, that body language. He's not hunched over anymore. He's just pointing out the truth. He reminds me a bit here of Rowan Atkinson with those bushy eyebrows and annoyed demeanor. Sort of a Blackadder 3 Rowan Atkinson. Here we see the Camouflage detachment highly decorated in a few branches and leaves. The surprise is so great it knocks Nimbus right off his feet. I love this drawing of Nimbus. His quick turnaround is complete with a bit of a ducking move. He sells this turnaround. Uderzo doesn't have him turn on his heel the way a strong military presence might. Instead, this is a man who's shocked by this turn of events. If this were a British officer with a stiff upper lip and a slightly upturned nose, I'd expect him to turn on the balls of his feet, snap to attention in the other direction, pretend nothing had ever happened, look down his nose at his underlings, and shout another order. But no, this is a crazy, silly Roman. Loud, brash, prone to quick reactions. He jumps and he spins and he ducks and he yells some more. That is character acting right there. It's very animated. So many of the Franco-Belgian artists at the time were influenced by Disney, and I have to think this is one small example of that in action. Speaking of animation, quick side tangent here. Goscinny and Uderzo would later form their own animation studio, I've never tried to say this out loud, Studio Ideafix. Ideafix. Never mind. Uderzo and Goscinny created a new story for Asterix and the 12 Tasks and made that movie, and the studio also produced the Lucky Luke movie, The Ballad of the Daltons. Sadly, the company dissolved with Goscinny's untimely death after only those 2 movies. The studio would make a good topic for another video actually someday. Leave a comment below if you'd like to hear more about that one. I also like this sequence of panels and the way that Uderzo swings the camera from the left side of the scene to the right, with an anchor point in between where he just shows the 2 characters at the center of the moment, sort of the fulcrum of the moment. The camera moves a tad to the left while pointing a little bit more to the right to capture the detachment there. It's just a nice way of using the comics format to achieve a bit of a cinematic moment. There's another super comic book way to do it where you take out the middle panel altogether, have maybe a continuous background going while the characters look left and right. It's tough to show here without drawing it, and nobody wants that from me. But imagine Nimbus dead center where the margin is there, and a bit of a ghosted image showing him looking left and then right. You'd have to simplify Felonious Caucus's dialogue down to one balloon to do it, and it changes the pacing, but it's another option. I also wonder if the last panel would work better without the silhouetted tents in the background here. While the tents do kind of frame the soldiers in, they also make the panel a little busier than it has to be. The tent lines fight with the spear tips and the branches. Maybe just having a blank background there would help the soldiers stand out a bit more and not compete with anything else. So, I gave it a shot. The background color is off, but there you have it. And I'm not entirely sure I like it. They look like they're floating in space now, anchored to the ground, but in their own little world. Maybe you need to remove the tent also on the left side to balance it all out. That tent weighs down the left side so much without anything on the right side to balance it out. The detachment also gets pushed forward a little bit more without a background there, and so they feel a little bit smaller. I don't know. It's just kind of weird looking. Who am I to criticize Uderzo? There's the side-by-side if you want to weigh in on it. But I do really love this gag. And I love how Goscinny and Uderzo staged it in such a way that it takes a moment to deliver the punchline. This isn't something you breeze past or that gets lost between two other bits of wordplay. This is a moment. And part of that, I'm sure, has to do with the original serialized nature of the story, where they had to fill a page every week. And while Goscinny, I'm sure, plotted this stuff out far in advance and probably had the whole book plotted out before they started on page 1, it's nice that they could create these moments on a single page as they went along, because it holds up even to this day in a collected edition. This book does not feel like a collection of short stories or a collection of scenes or a collection of sketches. It all holds together nicely. And every part of it deserves the attention of its own panel. Even Caucus's pointer finger here, and the way it swings around, and his line of dialogue gets broken up between two panels, it all just screams of two creators who are at the top of their storytelling powers. The dialogue matches perfectly where the reader's eyes should be looking. The story is just well told. And my God, those Roman soldiers are a big letdown to the Romans. Not the readers. They're an absolute gift to the readers. You go from what the Roman centurion thinks is a superlative camouflage detachment to the most pathetic, threadbare squad of losers whose camo is various branches they've attached to their headgear and their spears. So much of humor is about opposites, expecting one thing and getting something else, and you get that here in spades. Greatest camo detachment in Roman history, but maybe not. Proud centurion, flummoxed centurion. Look to the left, look to the right, short and skinny, tall and not fat at all, who are you calling fat? Etc., etc. Look, it's just a great half page, and I love this gag, and the book is still funny for the rest of the way, but this to me is the highlight. Coming up next time on page 6, the Roman troops roll out, but they'd much rather just take a nice nap. Also, the most British reference yet, that was so British, I didn't even realize it was British until someone explained it to me, and how the American edition fixed it. For reviews of every Asterix book and essays on everything from Alia Jacta Est to my trip to Caesar's Casino, check out the Asterix agenda over at pipelinecomics.com, or click on these suggested videos for more Asterix fun and games. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here next time.